Welcome to Unlimited Parenting. This is a podcast where we discuss what it's like being parents of children with disabilities. You are listening to part 3 of Demystifying Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. And today we are diving into Tier 3 of the PBIS framework. So this is when students need the highest level of individualized support. Before we dig in, let's take a quick look at where we've been. And if you haven't listened to Tiers 1 and 2 yet, I suggest popping over and listening to those first. So Tier 1, if you want to think of PBIS as a triangle, Tier 1 is the foundation. It's the bottom piece of that triangle. All students get Tier 1 support. Schools teach behavioral expectations akin to academics through modeling, practice, and positive reinforcement. Think of this as school-wide strategies like behavioral expectations posted in the hallway, token systems, and keeping those consistent routines. So, for example, your agenda for the day. And Tier 2 is for kids who need a little more. Maybe these are kids in small groups receiving targeted supports like check-in, check-out, social skills groups, self-monitoring tools, or behavioral contracts. Tier 2 helps students who are at risk but not yet in need of intensive intervention, which might lead you to ask, when would the team consider moving them from Tier 2 to Tier 3? What is the catalyst for that escalation up the triangle? That is, of course, going to be very individualized. It may look like reviewing 2 very specific sets of criteria. So, is the student not responsive to Tier 2 goals? At that point, it may be time to escalate to Tier 3. And after a review of office discipline referral data. So when we get to Tier 3, we're really looking at student behavior in frequency and intensity and self-harm to themselves and others. So let's talk more about top tier, Tier 3. When the students need support that's completely customized to their needs. Like I mentioned previously, after Tier 2, a more complex reinforcement system is frequently needed to support this individual student and reduce that frequency and intensity of problem behavior. So remember, like the triangle, Tier 3 is up at the top. It is the smallest piece of that triangle. So therefore, the smallest number of students are being supported there. And that roughly translates to between 1% and 5% of students. So out of a school, about 1% to 5% of students haven't responded to Tier 1 or Tier 2 strategies, and they get escalated up to Tier 3. So what might students existing within Tier 3, what might they struggle with? So those are students who are struggling with persistent or intense behavior challenges, intense emotional regulation difficulties, potentially trauma or mental health conditions, multiple suspensions or discipline referrals. Oftentimes at Tier 3, and I would say most always at Tier 3, these students have existing IEPs or 504 plans, behavioral intervention plans that include active and monitored behavioral goals. Tier 3 is individualized. It's based on deep assessments of the student's needs. It's collaborative. School teams work with families and potentially other mental health professionals to build this plan. It's incredibly dynamic. Strategies are adjusted regularly based off of the student's progress. And it's supportive. It's aimed at skill building, not punishment. Evidence-based interventions are utilized to teach skills, provide support necessary for students to access their core instruction, and participate with grade level peers. You'll notice that as a theme throughout all of our podcasts is just how students with disabilities were always general education students first. And the goal is always to put them in their least restrictive environment with the most time with their general education peers as applicable to them on an individual basis. PBIS is no different from that. The goal is always to have the student access core instruction and participate with grade level peers as much as applicable for their situation. Now let's move on to some of the most common Tier 3 strategies that you might find in schools. Remember, strategies are always going to work best when the student has a hand in crafting them. As a team, as a parent, consider letting the student, the youth, lead that meeting, lead the brainstorming on what potential reinforcers may be, when and where appropriate, and ask for their feedback frequently. Studies have shown that youth who are more involved in generating their plans have higher outcomes and greater success. The number one most common Tier 3 strategy would be a functional behavioral assessment, often referred to by its acronym FBA, and a behavioral intervention plan, referred to its acronym of BIP or BIP. The purpose of these is to identify the why behind behaviors that are occurring and then what skills to teach instead. So that might also be phrased as finding that if all communication is behavior, what is the ABCs, the antecedent, the behavior, the consequence, what is causing this behavior? And then what are the replacement skills that we can teach that the student can access just as quickly as they would access the skill that we're trying to modify? And that becomes very key. You cannot expect a student to do a replacement behavior that's 1 or 2, 3 steps more than the behavior that you want to replace. Because when a student is activated and they are outside of their bodies with their maladaptive behaviors, they are not able cognitively, in some cases, to access those 3 extra steps. So the replacement behavior needs to be just as accessible as the behavior that you want to replace. The structure of an FBA would be that staff gather data through observation, interviews, and tracking. So I'll share a little story about an FBA that was conducted on my own son. So an FBA really delves into one behavior in specific. And I won't bore you with the whole 7-8-step process, but essentially what it looked like with my son was they were trying to figure out why he wouldn't play on the playground with his peers anymore. And the staff that kind of followed him around at recess, at play, to try and figure out what was the antecedent behind this behavior after we had noticed that Silas was not playing on the playground with peers, which is an activity that he frequently engaged in prior. And there was about 3 days where he would not go anywhere near the playground. And the team and I discussed and requested that a functional behavioral assessment be conducted because he was having these completely out of the ordinary behaviors for him, and he just wouldn't go near the playground. And so upon following him and kind of assessing the behavior, the staff realized that there was a beehive, a hornet's nest, near the playground. And Silas, my son, just wasn't able to communicate what his fear was. So he was using behavior to communicate that. He wasn't able to access those executive functioning skills to be able to plan or communicate or organize. He couldn't access any of that. So he was just communicating purely through behavior. But through the process of an FBA, we were able to ascertain what was the antecedent, and then the consequence was he wouldn't play on the playground. So if we manipulate the antecedent, if we take away the hornet's nest, you'll notice that through that manipulation, and manipulation not in its derogatory term, but through the changing of the antecedent, right? That was able to change his behavior. So just keep that in mind. That's an example of what an FBA could potentially look like. And for a behavioral intervention plan, that is created with the information that is gathered through a functional behavioral assessment. It can be created through other ways too. But in this specific instance, it's being created through the information gathered in that functional behavioral assessment. It includes strategies to prevent challenging behaviors, how to teach new skills, how to respond consistently. And if you go to, and this will be linked in the description box, if you go to SESTA, our state's Technical Assistance Center for Education, Special Education, you will find that they have a myriad of resources on behavioral intervention plans, on functional behavioral assessments, on the competing behavior pathway. If it's related to behavior, you name it, they've got it. And they would be a wealth of resources. You can see examples of what an unfilled out behavioral intervention plan could look like, what the process is for conducting an FBA. They also have a parent resource section where you can find resources that are very well explained and easy to digest information. Oftentimes, if you are the parent of a child who is needing an FBA, who is needing a behavioral intervention plan, you may not be in a place where reading heavily academic or heavily jargoned or lots of abbreviations and acronyms, that might not be a space that you find yourself in where you can comprehend that information. And SISA has done a fantastic job of taking these resources and making that content parent-friendly. Because when you're in a crisis kind of situation like that with your child, you're just also not really able to access those parts of your brain. How could you generalize this for at home? So just like we did with Tier 1 and Tier 2 strategies, we'll talk a little bit about what you could do at home for those home-to-school connections. So for this, track patterns. Ask what happened before the behavior and ask what happened after. This can help you and the school team align strategies. And again, you'll remember this from the ABCs of behavior, the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. This is another way to engage your child, if appropriate, and say, hey, what happened right before that? And in this case, it may even be more beneficial because the child has been removed from the situation. The emotions are de-escalated. They may be able to provide you more feedback than they were in the moment with the staff when they were living that situation. Another common Tier 3 strategy would be wraparound services. Purpose of this is to create a holistic support system that spans school, home, and community. This could include meetings with school staff, mental health providers if they are in the community, mental health providers if they are at school, and family members. Shared plans and consistent goals across multiple settings, and just to ensure or provide resources like counseling, respite care, family training. And how this generalizes to home, don't hesitate to ask for support for services if your child's needs go beyond school. You are an equal member of this team with your child. Is your child being supported by the YES program or the YES system of care? Is that provider in those meetings? Are you child and family teaming in the community and bringing those individuals also into the school for these wraparound meetings? If you don't know what the YES system of care is, or if you don't know what the Youth Empowerment Services Program is and you'd like to learn more about it, you're welcome to reach out to us here at IPUL, and we'd love to speak about it. Number 3, one-on-one support. Professional or behavioral aid, however this looks. The purpose of this is to provide real-time support. So you might have noticed that functional behavioral assessment seemed to happen later, after the incident was occurring for a few days. A one-on-one support is going to be there in the moment to provide coaching and redirection during school activities. So some examples of the support they may provide is anticipate and prevent problem behaviors, prompting appropriate behaviors, using their proximity to the student to control and provide nonverbal cues, debrief after incidents to reflect and reinforce those coping skills. Hey, how could you have handled that differently? I know that that was really hard for you. It was really hard for you to transition from art back into the classroom. What are some of the skills that we've learned that you could try next time to help you make that move from the classrooms? A tip for the home would be to ask the school team what strategies their aide at school uses. Is it visual prompts? Is it check-ins? Is it movement breaks? Is it using proximity? And then try using them at home. Number 4, intensive counseling or social emotional support. Purpose of this is to build emotional regulation and social skills. This could include daily or weekly sessions with a counselor or a therapist, tools like breathing exercises, calming spaces, or just the development of more emotional vocabulary, more language to express. Or it could look like explicit teaching of skills like conflict resolution, emotional regulation, requesting or manding or tacting for breaks, and self-monitoring. And this could happen multiple ways. Again, this is very individualized. This could be throughout the day in natural context or scheduled coaching sessions. For a home tip, consider using visuals like a feeling thermometer or apps like the zones of regulation to help your child label and cope with emotions. This is not a plug or an ad. I'm not being sponsored, but the other day I was on Etsy and I saw a pillow that was intended for, I assume, a counselor's office or a therapist's office. And it was a huge feelings wheel. And you would start in the center and say, "Oh, I'm mad." And then from the word mad, it would branch out into 4 different options like frustrated, irritated. And then you'd choose whichever one you align with. And then it just keeps going so that you can get more and more detailed in describing what your mad really is. Number 5, last but not least, daily behavior reports or journals. These strengthen the homeschool connection and assist in providing regular feedback so everyone's on the same page. Everyone knows what happened at school. Everyone knows what happened at home. No one's left wondering, "Oh man, little Johnny looks like he didn't get enough sleep last night." You're already going to know that because you're going to have read the report that said, "Johnny had a really rough night. He's feeling kind of hungry, didn't get a lot of sleep," so that they can anticipate and not place those demands first thing in the morning. Kind of let him ease in and warm up, give him that grace that allows him to be his best self. Or her. What does the parent's role look like in Tier 3? I want to remind you again, I know I've said it before, but you're not just the parent, you're the partner. You're a leader in your child's success. And here are some tips to make Tier 3 work for you, the IEP team, the 504 team, the wraparound team, and your child. Number 1, be at the table. Presence is important. Attend the FBA, the Functional Behavioral Assessment, the BIP, the Behavioral Intervention Plan, the IEP, the Individualized Education Plan. Attend those meetings. 504s, share what works at home. Ask what's working at school. Ask for updates and what's changed. Ask for training. It's okay. It's encouraged to ask for coaching and how to use behavior tools. Stay connected. Use that communication notebook and email. Use Class Dojo, Parent Square, anything like that. Ask for updates, send updates throughout the day. Send an update in the morning. And lastly, advocate. If something isn't working, speak up. This is a team effort. What about generalizing Tier 3 supports to home and community? Tier 3 will only work if students can use these new skills beyond the classroom. Here's how to help your child carry these supports into everyday life. Implement visual schedules. Just like at school, a morning or evening routine with pictures or checklists can reduce anxiety and improve independence. I love and stand by a good checklist. They help me feel more grounded, so I can only imagine what that could feel like for a child too. Continue to reinforce replacement behaviors. If the school is helping to teach your child to ask for a break, using a specific way, maybe using a card or flipping a token over or whatever the case may be, practice that at home too. Create a calm down corner. Include familiar tools like a fidget, a weighted blanket, emotional charts, or that emotional pillow from Etsy. Again, not sponsored. Finally, use a daily rating sheet. Let your child reflect with you on their day. What worked? What was hard? A little pro tip, encourage your child to select how they felt, and then you select what you thought, and then provide reflections. Remember, letting the child advocate for themselves first promotes that sense of resilience and allows us to access those greater outcomes. What about in the community? Prep your child ahead of time. Lean into social stories or role play before going to new places, or even established places that maybe don't work out so well. For example, what about the dentist? Do you have a social story for going to the dentist, or maybe some specific sensory tools that you can lean heavily into for the dentist? Is there any kind of reward for the post-dental day? Lean into first then language. That could look like, first we go to the store, then you have iPad time. Or you could do yes then. Yes, we're going to the store, then you get to have iPad time. Identify safe exits or helpers. If you're in public, let your child know where they can go or who they can ask for help in public places, if appropriate and if they are able to. So for example, I tell my children, if you're out in public and for whatever reason we get separated, knock on wood, I always tell them to look for a mom with kids. So that could be something that you could lean into. And always partner with after-school providers, coaches, daycare staff. Share strategies that work, because consistency is key. Here's a pro tip. Make it your goal to use the same language across all settings. So if your school says ready, set, respectful, try using those phrases at home. Try and have after-school providers use those phrases. Grandma and grandpa are using those phrases. Anyone who has routine, consistent access using the same phrases. As we wrap up, I just want to emphasize that Tier 3 isn't about control. It's about understanding and meeting the child where they are. With individualized plans, strong home-school partnerships, community partnerships, and consistency across all settings, kids can learn the tools they need to thrive and be successful. Thank you so much if you've stuck through us throughout this entire PBIS series. Tier 1, a strong foundation for all, the bottom of the pyramid. Tier 2, targeted support for some, the middle of that pyramid. And Tier 3, intensive, individualized supports for a few. Remember, if you take nothing from any of this, it's that all behavior is communication. Thank you so much, everyone out there, for listening in. And know that if you are in Idaho or planning on moving to Idaho and have questions on systems or services for children with disabilities, please consider reaching out to us on our website at IPUL Idaho, that's IPUL Idaho.org, or by calling us at 208-342-5884. Be sure to tune in next time. Until then, this has been Unlimited Parenting.
Thanks for listening.